Get your daughter away from that man right now. The shrill command tore through the crisp morning air of Silverwood Estate's private playground, a place where money bought silence, manicured lawns, and invisible walls between them and us. Eleanor Carter froze mid-step, her designer scarf fluttering in the breeze, as her 7-year-old daughter, Lily, turned to her with eyes wide and lips trembling. And for the first time in 3 years, a sound emerged. Hello. One single word, fragile yet undeniable, hung in the air like a miracle. Eleanor's heart stopped. Since the accident that had stolen her husband's life, Lily had not spoken a syllable. Millions spent on doctors, therapists, specialists, all of it had failed. But here, crouched in the grass in his work-worn clothes, was Daniel Hayes, the estate's gardener, his dark hands still dirty from planting roses, smiling gently at Lily as though he had been waiting just for her. "He heard me, Mommy," Lily whispered, clutching her tiny hands to her chest. "He really heard me." Around them, murmurs of scandal buzzed, perfectly polished mothers shaking their heads, their jewels glittering like judgment. To them, Daniel was invisible until he dared to matter. To Eleanor, he was suddenly the keeper of a key she could not explain. Her pulse raced with a mixture of awe and fear. Could a stranger, a man they had dismissed as nothing more than staff, unlock what her fortune could not? Could one quiet voice reach into the silence that had imprisoned her daughter for so long? Tell me, if you were there, would you have pulled Lily away, convinced this was dangerous? Or would you have stood still and listened, daring to believe that salvation can sometimes arrive in the most unexpected form? Daniel Hayes had never asked to be noticed, and for most of his 35 years, the world had gladly obliged. He was the kind of man people looked through, not at, blending into the background with the quiet dignity of someone who understood that invisibility was sometimes safer than recognition. Each morning at Silverwood Estate, he arrived before dawn, carrying his battered toolbox and a thermos of coffee, strong enough to remind him he was still alive, trimming hedges, repairing sprinklers, planting flowers that would never bear his name but would draw praise from those who never thought to thank the hands that placed them. His limp made some residents glance with suspicion. His scars made others whisper, but Daniel endured it all with the calm of someone who had learned long ago that people only saw what they wanted to see. What none of them knew, what Eleanor Carter had begun to suspect in the frozen moment her daughter spoke, was that Daniel carried a history far heavier than a wheelbarrow of soil. Years ago, in dusty villages halfway across the world, he had knelt in blood and rubble, cradling children broken by war, performing miracles with nothing but his hands and sheer will. He had been a doctor once, a soldier once, but here he was simply the gardener, a role that required no explanation, no vulnerability, just sweat and silence. Yet when Lily Carter's soft hello spilled into the world after 3 years of silence, it cracked something inside him that he thought had long since hardened. He hadn't coaxed the word, hadn't demanded it. He had simply crouched down to her level, seen her not as a diagnosis or a patient, but as a child longing to be heard, and somehow that had been enough. Eleanor's eyes, wide with disbelief, carried more questions than he could answer, and the other mother's glares pierced him with an old familiar sting. "This is unacceptable," one hissed, her pearl necklace glinting like a chain of judgment. But Daniel, used to the bite of harsher words, did not flinch. He only tipped his head respectfully, gathered his tools, and prepared to retreat as though nothing had happened. Yet in Lily's gaze, shimmering with joy, he saw what he could not ignore: trust. She clung to his presence with a devotion unearned but undeniable, her small voice whispering again as if savoring the sound. "Thank you." For a man who had been thanked on battlefields with tears and trembling hands, this quiet gratitude from a child carried more weight than medals ever had. Eleanor's heart twisted. She had seen specialists come and go, had heard their clinical explanations and their promises. None had worked, and now a stranger the world considered unworthy had broken through the silence with nothing but kindness. It frightened her almost as much as it awed her. How could she explain it? How could she trust it? Yet as she held Lily's hand and felt the warmth of her daughter's voice still vibrating in the air, Eleanor understood that her carefully ordered life had just been upended. For better or worse, the man they all called the gardener had stepped out of invisibility, and there would be no returning him to the shadows again. The following morning dawned with the same golden light spilling across Silverwood Estate, but for Eleanor Carter, everything felt different, as though the air itself hummed with questions she could not silence. Lily woke before the sun, her chatter bubbling like a brook after a long drought, words tumbling out in a rush as though her small body feared the silence might return if she did not keep speaking. Eleanor sat at the edge of her daughter's bed, tears pricking her eyes as she listened, the sound both foreign and achingly familiar. And though she whispered reassurances, inside she could not stop wondering why this man, Daniel Hayes, the gardener, had succeeded where world-renowned specialists had failed. Later, as they walked to the playground, Lily spotted Daniel across the lawn, bent over a patch of roses, and without hesitation, she broke free from her mother's hand and ran to him, her laughter carrying across the manicured hedges. "Good morning, Daniel," she called, her voice high and bright, and he looked up, startled at first, then softened by a smile that revealed both joy and pain. He crouched to greet her, his movements slow, deliberate, careful with the leg that still bore the memory of old wounds. "Good morning, little one," he said gently, his voice warm like sunlight through leaves. Lily clutched his arm, beaming with pride. "I told Mommy about you last night," she announced. "She said you must be very special." Daniel's smile deepened, but behind it flickered the weight of a truth he kept buried, a life he had chosen to hide beneath dirt-stained gloves and quiet labor. Before he could answer, Margaret Blake, the iron-willed president of the estate's Residents Association, stormed across the lawn, her heels striking the stone path like gunshots. "Lily Carter, step away from him immediately!" she barked, her eyes flashing with indignation. "How many times must we remind you not to fraternize with the staff?" Lily shrank back at the sharpness in her tone, but her small hand clung tighter to Daniel's lips. "But he's my friend," she said simply, her voice trembling but defiant. The word friend landed like a stone in the quiet, startling even Eleanor as she arrived, her steps quick with both fear and determination. Margaret's gaze snapped to Daniel, her voice dripping venom. "This is unacceptable. You are deliberately overstepping your place." Daniel rose slowly, not releasing Lily's hand, his posture suddenly commanding though he wore only faded work clothes. His eyes met Margaret's with a calm that carried the echo of battlefields she could never imagine. "You are right, Mrs. Blake," he said evenly. "The child does not know everything about me, just as you do not." His words, measured and precise, cut through the morning air with the quiet authority of someone who had spoken in far more dangerous rooms. Margaret faltered for the briefest of moments, thrown off balance by his tone, before regaining her composure with a sneer. But Eleanor had seen it, the flicker of respect Daniel's presence demanded, a truth that unsettled her even as it intrigued her. Watching him, she could not shake the feeling that this man, dismissed as a gardener, carried within him a story that had the power to upend everything she thought she knew about strength, healing, and the boundaries of class. And as Lily's small voice chattered on, alive and unstoppable, Eleanor knew that no amount of whispered warnings from women like Margaret could undo the bond that had already begun to take root between her daughter and the man who had finally heard her. By the end of that week, whispers had grown into open hostility, spreading through Silverwood Estate like wildfire carried on polished lips and manicured hands. Margaret Blake gathered the other mothers in her sunlit sitting room, its walls lined with oil paintings and crystal vases, and spoke with the conviction of a woman convinced of her own righteousness. "We cannot allow this man to disrupt our community," she declared, her voice sharp as the clink of china teacups. "He's ingratiating himself with Eleanor's daughter, and soon, who knows what motives he'll reveal. Men like him always want something." The others nodded, some out of prejudice, others out of fear of being the lone dissenter. They scribbled notes, made calls, even proposed hiring a private investigator. Their eyes gleamed with the thrill of dismantling someone they believed beneath them. Meanwhile, Daniel Hayes continued his work in quiet resilience, pruning roses, repairing sprinklers, raking paths, all the while carrying the weight of rumors like stones in his pocket. But when Lily bounded across the lawn each morning, calling his name with joy, he felt the rumors dissolve in her laughter. To her, he was not a gardener, not a stranger, not a man to be feared. He was simply Daniel, the one who had listened when the world did not. Still, Eleanor Carter could not ignore the mounting tension. At luncheons, whispers followed her, thinly veiled barbs about poor judgment and risky behavior. Patricia's words still rang in her ears. You can't let your daughter interact with people like that. And yet every time she looked into Lily's shining eyes, heard her chatter about Daniel's lessons on flowers, or the way he showed her how to step on soft grass, she knew she could not sever that bond. One morning, Eleanor arrived at the playground to find Patricia and two other women documenting Daniel's presence with cameras, their postures triumphant, as though catching a criminal in the act. Lily ran to him fearless, her laughter ringing out, and Eleanor felt the heat of their stares burn into her skin. This is inappropriate fraternization, Margaret barked loudly, drawing the attention of bystanders. Employees are not to cross such boundaries. Daniel straightened, his calm unbroken, and met her fury with measured grace. Mrs. Blake, he said, his voice low but resonant, may I ask what specific rule I am violating by speaking politely to a child who addresses me? Margaret faltered, caught off guard by the precision of his words. You know very well it's against conduct, she stammered, but Daniel pressed gently. And what kind of people, precisely, are forbidden from conversation? The question, sharp as a scalpel, exposed the prejudice beneath her polished exterior. Eleanor stood frozen, watching the exchange, her chest tightening with realization. This man was no ordinary gardener. His composure, the way he scanned the area instinctively, the faint scars visible along his forearm, all of it spoke of a life lived under pressure, of someone trained to fight battles far greater than neighborhood politics. She felt the ground shift beneath her. In that moment, Daniel Hayes was not merely defending himself. He was dismantling an entire structure of unspoken prejudice, brick by brick, using nothing but truth and calm authority. Margaret's lips curled, her face flushed crimson, but her words faltered, and for the first time in years, she looked small, diminished in her own kingdom. Eleanor realized then that the fight brewing in this estate was no longer about her daughter speaking. It was about whether truth and kindness could withstand arrogance and power. And as she reached for Lily's hand, pulling her close, she understood she was standing at the edge of a storm that would either expose Daniel completely or destroy the fragile world they had built in these gardens. That evening, long after the children's laughter had faded and the manicured lawns of Silverwood Estate lay in shadows, Eleanor Carter sat at her mahogany desk, surrounded by medical files, therapy reports, and endless invoices that had drained her fortune without restoring her daughter's voice. Yet all she could think about was how Daniel Hayes had accomplished in minutes what teams of specialists had failed to achieve in years. Who was he truly? She scrolled through her phone late into the night, seeking traces of him, but found little beyond employment records that were frustratingly sparse. No resume, no past positions, no trail of credentials. It was as though he had been erased before arriving here. But Eleanor had always been relentless. She built an empire by uncovering solutions no one else could see, and she knew that the man who had given her daughter back her voice was no ordinary gardener. At dawn, as Daniel arrived with his toolbox and thermos, he found an envelope taped to the back gate. In bold letters it read, "Final warning. Inappropriate behavior with minors. Dismissal imminent. Signed by Margaret Blake." Daniel slipped it into his pocket without flinching, his jaw tightening only for a moment. He had lived this script before. Accusations whispered, motives questioned, doors closed in his face. But as he turned, a voice pierced the quiet. "Daniel!" Lily came running, her pigtails bouncing, her laughter scattering the weight of the morning. She flung herself into his arms, speaking rapid fire as if she needed to make up for the years of silence. "I told Mommy about you. She said you must be very special." Daniel smiled, kneeling to meet her gaze. But before he could answer, Margaret's sharp voice cut through like a blade. "Lily Carter, get away from him, this instant!" She stormed across the grass, her expression twisted with indignation. "This man is violating every rule we have set to protect our children." Eleanor arrived just as the confrontation escalated, her eyes heavy with sleeplessness, but burning with determination. She had spent the past 48 hours replaying the moment her daughter first spoke, and the truth was inescapable. Daniel mattered. "Enough, Margaret," Eleanor said firmly, stepping between them. "Emma hadn't spoken in 3 years. If Daniel has helped her, I not only allow their interaction, I encourage it. The declaration sent a ripple through the onlookers, gasps mixing with murmurs of disapproval. Margaret's face blanched, then twisted with fury. You are being manipulated, she spat. People like him always have ulterior motives. Daniel rose slowly, his presence suddenly larger than the sum of his scars and work clothes. His gaze met hers with a calm that was more unsettling than anger. You are right, Mrs. Blake, he said evenly. Lily does not know everything about me, just as you do not. The words spoken with quiet authority lingered like a challenge. Eleanor, watching him, saw the subtle clues she had missed before. The way his eyes scanned exits, his posture disciplined, the scars hidden beneath his sleeves. This was not the body language of a mere gardener. It was the bearing of a man trained to survive storms most people could not imagine. Later that night, as Daniel sat in his cramped apartment shared with two other veterans, he stared at the warning letter crumpled on the table. He reached for his phone, his hand trembling only slightly, and dialed a number he had not called in years. Colonel Davidson, he said when the voice answered, his tone steady but edged with vulnerability. This is Dr. Daniel Hayes. I need my full military records. Silence stretched on the other end, then a stunned reply. Daniel, my God, son, where have you been? We've been trying to find you since Kandahar. Daniel's breath caught. Memories surged, dust, blood, cries of children, the relentless rhythm of surgery performed under fire. He closed his eyes, steadying himself. I need to prove who I really am, he said softly. And in that moment, the hidden truth of the man everyone thought was a gardener began to stir, ready to shatter every assumption that had been built around him. 2 days later, the residents of Silverwood Estate crowded into the grand hall for an emergency meeting called by Margaret Blake, her voice carrying the urgency of someone determined to crush what she could not control. The chandeliers glittered above polished oak tables as 23 families gathered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disdain. At the back, Daniel Hayes sat quietly in his gardener's uniform, his shoulders square, his eyes sharp, scanning the exits with the ease of a man who had spent years calculating survival. Margaret's words rang out with theatrical authority. Ladies and gentlemen, we face a grave threat to the integrity of our community. This man, our gardener, has repeatedly violated conduct rules, interacting with children in ways that are suspicious and unacceptable. She gestured dramatically toward Daniel, as if presenting a criminal. Whispers rose like rustling leaves, fueled by fear and prejudice. Margaret's allies produced a folder, shaking it open with glee. We hired a private investigator, one woman declared. Clean record, yes, but military service riddled with trauma, injuries, psychiatric evaluations, clearly unstable. Another added with venom, he suffers from PTSD. Do you want such a man around your children? The crowd murmured agreement, their faces tightening with judgment. Eleanor Carter sat near the front, her hands folded over a briefcase that held the truth she was prepared to unleash. She watched Daniel carefully, expecting defensiveness or shame, but instead he looked almost amused, as if watching a play whose ending he already knew. At last, Margaret slammed her hand on the table. I motion for the immediate dismissal and permanent banishment of Daniel Hayes from Silverwood Estate. All in favor? 17 hands shot up instantly. Before the vote could be finalized, Daniel stood. The silence was immediate. He did not raise his voice, yet it filled the room with authority earned far from this place. May I speak before you condemn me? Margaret bristled. You have no right. But Daniel cut her off gently. You discuss my life. Surely I deserve a moment to clarify what has been twisted. He stepped forward, the limp that marked him as weak suddenly invisible, his gait controlled, deliberate, commanding. Reaching into his pocket, he produced an envelope, unfolding papers with hands steady as stone. You claim my service left me broken. Let me remind you what it truly meant. He held up a document stamped with the seal of the Department of Defense. Dr. Daniel Hayes, United States Army, combat surgeon, 2 Bronze Stars for valor. A presidential citation for exceptional service. He paused, letting the silence grow heavy. In Kandahar, under enemy fire, I performed 17 surgeries on wounded children, over 14 hours with no anesthesia, saving every life. I carry scars, yes, but they are the scars of someone who fought to keep others alive. Gasps rippled through the crowd, disbelief colliding with shame. Margaret's face drained of color, but she sputtered, "That doesn't change the fact that you—" Daniel pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket, clicking it on. Margaret's voice filled the hall. "People like him always try to take advantage of families like ours. He's planning some kind of scam." The recording was damning, echoing against the marble walls. Daniel pressed another button, and Catherine Blackwell's voice sneered. "He's targeting Eleanor because of her daughter's condition." Murmurs turned into outright discomfort as neighbors shifted in their seats. Finally, Daniel handed the recorder to Eleanor, who rose with quiet fury. "I spent over $500,000 trying to give my daughter her voice back. 3 years of silence until Daniel spoke to her. In 2 minutes, she said her first word. Since then, she hasn't stopped talking. This man gave me my daughter back. And you dare call him dangerous?" From her briefcase, Eleanor revealed additional documents. Before enlisting, Dr. Hayes was one of the leading pediatric surgeons at Johns Hopkins. His so-called instability? 3 months of voluntary therapy to grieve a fallen comrade? Nothing more. The hall was silent, the weight of prejudice exposed. Daniel's voice broke through, calm and steady. "You judged me by my scars and my skin, but I was never hiding. You simply never asked." Then almost casually he added, "And for the record, I no longer need this job. Eleanor has offered me the role of Director of Human Development at her company, starting Monday." The revelation landed like a hammer. Margaret's face contorted with rage, but Daniel's calm smile made it clear. He had already won a war she hadn't even understood was being fought. 6 months later, the sun set warmly over Silverwood Estate, its manicured gardens now renamed Dr. Daniel Hayes Park by unanimous vote of the residents. A quiet yet powerful admission that the man they once dismissed had reshaped their world. Eleanor Carter watched from a bench as her daughter Lily chased other children across the grass, her laughter bright and unbroken, her voice carrying the kind of freedom Eleanor once feared she would never hear again. Daniel arrived in a tailored suit, no longer pushing a gardener's cart, but stepping from a sleek car, the weight of respect replacing the cloak of invisibility he had worn for too long. As Director of Human Development at Eleanor's company, he had launched programs that gave hundreds of children with communication disorders a chance to find their voices, and with each success, the scars on his arms seemed less like wounds and more like medals of purpose. Margaret Blake, once queen of whispered judgments, had long since vanished from the estate, her downfall etched into every family's memory as a warning of what arrogance can cost. Yet Daniel carried no bitterness, only the steady conviction that turning pain into purpose was the greatest victory of all. Lily ran to him, breathless, tugging at his hand. "Uncle Daniel, will you come to my recital next week? I want you to hear me sing." He knelt to her level, eyes shining with pride, and whispered, "I wouldn't miss it for the world." As the evening breeze rustled the trees, Eleanor looked at Daniel and realized he had given her far more than her daughter's voice. He had given her hope, a reminder that strength often hides in the most unexpected people. And so the question lingers for you, dear listener. How many Daniels have we overlooked? How many voices have we silenced by judging only what we see? If you've ever been underestimated or witnessed someone rise beyond prejudice, share your story in the comments below. Because sometimes the miracle we seek is standing right in front of us, waiting for us to listen.